So before we jump into things, thank you to Earpiece Earplugs for being a sponsor of this video. They've helped us out in this video and the last video, maybe more to come, and we really appreciate it. We all use them. Glad to have them on board.
So Ryan, looks like what we have here is the reincarnation of a good old-fashioned American rivalry with the Indian Scout and the Harley-Davidson Nightster. It's a rivalry going back quite a ways with the original Sportster on the Harley side and the Indian Scout on the Indian side. But we have these two bikes which represent this new generation of the Harley-Indian rivalry. With the Nightster, well, I'll let Ryan talk about it. What do we have with this next generation Nightster slash Sportster reincarnation?
The big thing here, that and you can see it, this is a completely new motor. So you've got the Revolution Max motor that we first saw in the Harley-Davidson Pan America. They've shrunk down the cylinders a little bit. It's actually the exact same size engine, but now it's a 975cc engine. And now you can also see from the frame up here, it's a stressed member of the chassis, whereas before the Sportsters had the loop frame. And so this is very much a completely different motorcycle, and it's thoroughly modern.
So what makes the Indian Scout Rogue the Rogue is you have this whole blacked out treatment. You've got the black exhaust, the black engine, the black shocks, the black wheels, the black bars, these drop down mirrors, the single seat here, a bigger front wheel, this fly screen, and just little touches here and there. At the heart of it, you got the 1133cc V-twin, 4 valves per cylinder, nothing new on the engine side of things. So on paper you would think bigger engine on the Indian, smaller engine on the Harley. From a performance standpoint, the Indian should be the winner, but as the dyno showed us, Ryan, that is not the case. Actually, what did happen on the dyno?
It was basically the exact same dyno chart from both of these things, and they both put out the same torque number and the same horsepower number basically within, tenths of each other. So interesting.
So as we see from the dyno chart, they make nearly the same power, and the charts and the graphs almost look the same, but the way these two bikes deliver the power is completely different. And Ryan, you can speak to this too. How was the power delivered?
It's interesting. The Indian does feel like kind of your typical cruiser, that typical V-twin, lots of torque right off the line, whereas on this new Harley with this new Revolution Max engine, honestly it kind of falls on its face, and you can see that little dip in the beginning of its dyno graph. But once you get kind of into the mid-range and really up the upper mid-range to its top end is where it makes all of its power. It feels more like the kind of motor you'd find in a naked bike.
Yeah, and that got us both thinking, like, wouldn't this engine be great if it were bigger and put into a Street Fighter type of motorcycle? Huh. Wasn't the Bronx supposed to be that bike?
Maybe one day.
So that really got us thinking about what Harley could be doing behind the scenes with that engine. But that engine is only the beginning of how these two bikes are really, really different. And the more we rode these, the more we discovered lots of little differences that almost make these two bikes incomparable. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. And it's interesting to have come to that revelation after riding the bikes, because also go to the website, look at the spec chart. There's so many things that are so close, and it's interesting that the dyno chart came out the way it did. Everything on paper, you'd be like, these things are the exact same bike, but after being out here and function, it's not really the case. The Harley is the sportier bike out of these two. You rev it up into the RPMs. It just goads you to go faster. The front brake is much better. The suspension is done by Show on both ends, and although you only have 3 inches in the rear and like 4.5 in the front, travel-wise, it does a good job of damping the impacts, whereas, you know, if we want to get right into it, the Indian does not. It's got 2 inches of travel in the rear, and almost the same in the front, but the suspension just feels, the damping on it is very harsh, which I guess you have to do with 2 inches of travel in the shocks. But I know there is a shock upgrade from Indian, which is kind of funny. You can spend more money to put different shocks on it, and they know that you might. But yeah, just very different performing machines. Like, you ride the Indian like you would a classic cruiser, tons of torque. You can ride that torque wave, you don't have to shift a lot. But with the Harley, you want to rev it out, and it's so much fun on twisty roads.
Totally. And even the seating position tells you you're on very different motorcycles. Like Ryan said, you have the classic cruiser position on the Indian. You're sitting low, you're sitting back, your feet are up front and forward. The bars are up high with these little mini ape hangers. You've got that traditional cruiser feel. Hop on the Harley and it kind of twists your perception of what riding a Harley should be like. You've got the mid-mount controls, the seat. I'm trying to describe the seat without sounding mean. You're kind of sloped backwards a little bit, and you're sliding backwards, and those bars are flat, so you're always having to pull yourself upwards to not fall off the back of the thing. That's an accurate description, right?
I would say, yeah, unless you're riding aggressively out in, you know, canyon roads. On the way, you know, to meet up this morning on the freeway, I felt like I was constantly pulling myself back up. And the little bit of a bump that the seat has on the back is not really that noticeable, so it's kind of hard to tell where you're at in the seat. You can move around more. It's got more room to move around than the Indian. You're kind of locked in to one position on the Indian. But yeah, I kind of felt like maybe if the bars were like an inch back farther, it would help with that. But as it sits, I did kind of find myself always pulling up during normal riding.
You know, we went into this test thinking, oh, it's going to be straightforward, Indian, Harley, cruisers. We have an idea of how this is going to play out. I think we can honestly say, Ryan, like, this has thrown us for a loop because they are very different motorcycles. We were joking yesterday or the other day about, like, we can find things we really, really like about both bikes and things we really, really hate about both bikes. And since you, the viewer, are always asking us about stuff we hate about motorcycles,
we're going to give it to you.
We're going to give it to you right now, and I'll get started here on the Indian. First off, the suspension travel on the Indian is horrendous. The lengths Indian and in the past Harley too has gone to make this seat as low as possible, compromising the ride quality to be able to sit on this thing. I mean, I'm 5'8", 30-inch inseam, not a problem at all sitting on this bike. I'd imagine most folks can do the same thing. To sacrifice the quality of the ride to make the seat easy to sit on, it's getting a bit ridiculous. I mean, we're hitting bumps I've never noticed before on roads we travel all the time, and it's just compressing my spine and, you know, making me have to like tense up in preparation for a bump. And then that leads to really awkward performance, even on curves that you wouldn't consider curves. The pegs touch down super quickly. The exhaust on the right side touch down at lean angles you wouldn't expect to be very aggressive. And then that just makes the bike handle really awkwardly when you hit a bump and you're leaned over because there's no suspension to absorb it. It's a really awkward feeling. And then just going in a straight line down the freeway, again, expansion joints on the freeway or little bumps in the road on the freeway, even in a straight line, just shoot all the way up your body, and it's a really awkward feeling. I do like the engine though. This Indian Scout engine is what I want from a cruiser. I like that low down torque. I like the delivery of power right off the bottom. I don't care about top end power on a cruiser. I want it low so I can just cruise around and have fun. So there's like these two opposite ends of the spectrum that the Scout delivers, and I know we both have complaints of the Harley, but I'll let Ryan dig into that bike a little bit more.
I'm going to start with the things I like about the Harley. I love the engine. It's a great engine. Having these two back-to-back out here in twisty roads, it's a ton of fun. Also, that is going to end up being a negative too, because when you're riding around town, that little dip that I mentioned earlier and that you can see in the dyno chart, it just kind of has, the Harley kind of falls on its face right before it revs up quickly and spins up quickly into the meat of its power, but from stoplight to stoplight, you get this, you're so used to riding a cruiser that just has tons of torque that bolts you off of any stop, whereas on the new Nightster with this motor, it kind of just, and it's kind of annoying around town, honestly. Out here, it's a blast. Anytime, I would rather pick the Nightster out here because it has more lean angle. The foot pegs are shorter, so you know that probably adds to it. Its front brake is much better. Its suspension, again, is better. So riding it in a sporty fashion, it's night and day between these two. But again, if you're looking for a cruiser, which the Indian comes closer to just being a standard cruiser, the Harley, it doesn't feel like a Sportster anymore. It feels like a cross between a cruiser and a naked bike in a cruiser riding positions. And Harley tells us the layout of this motorcycle is exactly what the previous Iron 883 was. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like Troy said, there's pros and cons, and it's almost difficult, like it's like an identity crisis at times with these bikes. The Indian, I don't know, it is pretty much your standard cruiser. My biggest complaints with the Indian, for sure, the suspension is number one. The front brake feels nice and strong, like when you squeeze it, but then the power that it actually delivers, I mean, it does have a 2-pot caliper versus the 4 on the Harley, and we only have one rotor on both bikes, but the power just isn't really there on the Indian. I mean, once you get into it, with the rear brake, it does get stopped plenty quick, but it's just not as confidence-inspiring as the Harley-Davidson is. And I would say between those two things, the seat is my other big complaint. That seat, it looks cool, but it really locks you into one position and kind of feels really scooped. For me, style-wise, the Indian checks all the style marks for me. I love the way it looks. I guess it's me being a millennial, but I dig the whole blacked out scheme, the matte green paint. It looks great in the light too. It's got a little bit of flake in it. It's a really stylish, cool looking motorcycle. I feel cool cruising around town on it. Well, and it's more fun taking off from each stoplight.
That's some bad news for you, Ryan. Anyway.
Tell me, but what do you think, Troy?
So my thoughts on the Harley pretty much echo what Ryan said too. That's a fantastic engine. I love it a lot. What I don't like about it, when you look at this side of the Harley, it looks cool, right? That engine looks great, the covers look great, the exhaust looks great. This whole side of the bike looks cool. Hop on the other side of the bike and it looks really unfinished. You've got exposed hoses and cords and this and that and the other thing, and just covers here and there that kind of look disjointed and weird. You know, I know everything motorcycle design wise is a compromise, but you look at this Indian here and it's put together real nice. Yeah, and then having to pull myself up on the seat whenever I'm just like riding down the road is a bit weird, but kind of an unfinished product with the Nightster with some really, really cool features and some really questionable decision making on Harley's part. Which leaves us with a bit of a conundrum, Ryan. So, if I were to put you in a corner and say, pick one, which one are you picking?
I mean, the Nightster is really cool, and after having a few days out in canyon roads testing it, it's so much fun to ride fast, and especially compared to the Indian. You know, if you're jumping back and forth between these two, and if you want a small kind of lightweight cruiser to, ride in a sporty fashion and you're not just looking to ride around town, the Nightster is definitely a cool bike. And one of the, having this just be a cover and putting the gas down low allows this bike to have a really low center of gravity. When you used to pick up any Harley, but even the Sportsters, off the kickstand, you'd kind of have to throw your weight into it. Now, with all the weight so low, I mean, this thing comes off the kickstand super easy. So for newer riders, smaller riders, people that are just getting into it, maybe getting their first bigger bike, this could be a really good option for them. If I had to pick for just normal cruiser riding, this doesn't really feel like what you think a cruiser is going to be. That 100% does. Well, I guess if I was going to buy a small cruiser, I'd be buying it because I want it to be a cruiser. And I could get a different seat for the Indian. I could pay more for more suspension travel and the shock, which is annoying, but I could. If I'm gonna buy a small cruiser, I guess I'm buying a cruiser because I want to cruise around on it. And again, style-wise, I love the Scout Rogue. And they've got some other cool colors. If I'm buying a sporty bike, I'm probably going to buy a properly sporty bike, maybe in the naked category. So for cruising, it's going to have to be the Scout Rogue. But how do you feel?
How do I feel? You're not going to believe this, Ryan, but I agree with you.
What?
I know. Same thing. I mean, if I'm going to buy a cruiser, I want to cruise on it. If I'm going to buy a sporty bike, I'll buy a sporty bike. And like I've mentioned a million times already in this video, that engine is ready for a sporty bike. Everything else surrounding it, though, is not. So, to get back to what Ryan said, I'm buying a cruiser because I want to cruise on it, and the Indian checks all those boxes. This is the cruiser that, of these two, does the cruiser things really well. However, being the sporty guy I am, in my heart of hearts, I'm hoping Harley has got way more up its sleeve for that engine, for the RevMax engine, in both this displacement, the 975, and the bigger one, the 1250, putting it in really fun, exciting, sporty motorcycles, in which case, that would really get my heart pumping. But
and we've already seen that they already have plans for a smaller adventure bike with this motor.
Exactly.
So it's definitely, this motor is we're going to see it in a lot of different cool places down the road.
So according to us, the Nightster kind of misses the mark, and the Indian, of the two, nails it, but the potential for what Harley is bringing to the table is super high right now. So Harley fans, don't be dejected necessarily just yet, but that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And very interesting test, because this did not shake out the way we thought it was going to, but that's why we do this, because sometimes they don't always play out the way we think they're going to. So yeah, that's enough of Ryan and I rambling on about the Indian Scout Rogue and the Harley-Davidson Nightster. As always, to read written words about these two bikes, be sure to go here, Motorcycle.com. Read the full review there. You'll find a dyno chart there, a ton of pictures from Evans Brassfield, who's sitting off camera, a ton of cool pictures from him, both of our Ryan and I's, our notes about these bikes. That's where you'll find the detailed info about these two bikes. So be sure to go there and, click, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. So before we leave you today, we do need to thank our sponsor, Earpiece Earplugs. These aren't just your typical foam earplugs, people. These ones allow you to put them in your ear and block out the noise you don't want to hear and retain the noise you do want to hear, like the engine sound, for example. So if you're looking for a set of earplugs that'll do you right, Earpiece Earplugs are the way to go. Thanks to them for being a really good sponsor and a really good partner here at Mo, and we owe them a lot. Check them out.